The Bookshelf with Ryan Tubridy is brought to you by Eason, Ireland's favourite bookseller. Unwrap the magic of Christmas gifting with books from Eason this festive season, where they've created hundreds of the best new titles available to help you find the perfect presents for all the special people in your life. And sure, you might even pick up one of the books we discuss with our guest on this episode. Or maybe you'll opt for this week's Ryan Recommends book, which I'll discuss with you at the end of the episode. As ever, all the books we discuss on this episode of our podcast are available now in your local Eason store, or indeed order online from easons.com before 6 p.m. for same-day dispatch with free delivery when you spend over a tenner. Eason, be inspired. Today on The Bookshelf, we're joined by one of the most outspoken and influential figures of media in recent times. Known for his sharp wit and fearless interviewing style, he has made waves as a journalist, an editor, a television host on shows like Good Morning Britain and Piers Morgan Uncensored, in shows in the UK and, of course, in America. But today we're going to be diving into the reader behind the headlines as he shares his favourite childhood book, the book that made him cry and the book that changed his life. What an interesting afternoon this will be as we introduce and welcome Piers Morgan to the Bookshelf. Welcome, Piers.
What a pleasure to be here.
It's good to see you.
Yeah.
How's life?
Busy. I mean, I've just been in America for the election. I was one of the people that thought Trump would win big and kept telling people that, and no one wanted to believe me. But I could feel it like I did in 2016. But very interesting reaction this time, where in 2016, there were mass protests, huge marches, hysteria, fury, rage. And this year, nothing.
Yeah.
I mean, in New York, it was like nothing had happened. It was almost like the liberal crowd knew they'd just blown it.
Yeah.
And almost played into his hands, you know. So it was fascinating to be there. Very, very different atmosphere. No marches, no protests. You know, the infamous Madison Square Garden rally he did.
Yes.
I was there, first rally I've ever been to for any politician. And there were 150 people turned up to protest. There were 50,000 turned up to get in who were Trump supporters who couldn't get in. And I said then, he's obviously going to win by a landslide. But people didn't want to sort of see what was happening in front of their very eyes.
You called him the day after the election.
Yeah.
Randomly just to say hello or to say well done? Or?
I got his number and I called him to congratulate him and to just have a chat with him. We speak, I mean, reasonably regularly. I've known him nearly 20 years from when I competed on his Celebrity Apprentice show in America, and I won it. And so after that, I then went on his apprentice show a few times as his boardroom advisor. Then I went to CNN and interviewed him 30, 40 times. Then we used to speak to each other every 3-4 weeks on the phone, just have catch-ups.
Yeah.
And then one day he says, I'm definitely running for president. And I remember writing a column the day he announced, when everyone was laughing and everyone was mocking him. And I wrote a column saying, I've known Trump a long time, and he's only entering this because he thinks he can win. And he has a habit of having the last laugh. So watch this space, America.
Okay, so he's had the last laugh.
And he's had the last laugh twice. Yeah, this time I think we'll see a different Trump.
Better or worse?
I think better, because I think he knows now how to do it and how it works, how the machinery of Washington works. He'll still be Trump, but I mean, look, just bringing in someone like Elon Musk, who is arguably the most brilliant mind in the world today. If you look at what he's done with Tesla, with SpaceX, with Neuralink, with all of these things.
He seems quite mad.
Well, I think he's a sort of brilliantly bonkers genius. You know, I met him in South of France this summer and had an hour with him over a bottle of wine, and he was absolutely fascinating. I mean, when he talks to you about humanoid robots and what they are and what they can do and what they will be able to do, and he said you'll all have at least one. Wealthy people will have 5 or 6. They'll do all domestic chores, and he said, and they're going to be about $20,000 each, and I'm going to sell millions of them.
So does Elon Musk have dialogue, or is it a monologue when you're chatting with him?
He will listen to you. I mean, he does listen, but you just get the feeling that as he's talking to you, if you're talking to him back, his mind is thinking about colonizing Mars, right? Or literally landing rockets in catching devices like he did recently. I mean, the scale of what he does is absolutely insane.
When you ring Donald Trump, as you did the day after he got elected, does he go answer by saying, "Hey, Piers," or you know, I mean, is it like that, or does he toy with you? Or
well, he used to say, which I quite liked. He used to say, "Is that my champion?" Because I won his show, and I used to quite like the idea of the president of the United States calling me his champion. But now he just goes, "Piers." He actually said, "Piers, can you believe this? Can you believe this?" I went, Yes, because I predicted it. But I told you, I rang him. Well, he rang me the week after he was shot. And I just got to New York that time and I was live on Fox. And he was about to do another rally. And I said, you know what about Donald Trump? Whatever you think of him, the way he got back on his feet after being shot and said, fight, 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 was an iconic moment, but also extraordinary personal courage. I mean, if I'd just been shot and I was an American president, the very last thing I would do is get back up into a line of fire, not knowing that there are other shooters out there. But he did. And I think that really resonated with a lot of Americans. And then to get back on a rally stage a week later in front of 20,000 people you don't know, again, enormous personal courage. So I think that was the moment for me when he won the election.
And he called you.
And he called me because he watched me on Fox saying this. And he rang me and he went, I'm just watching you. Said, it's quite something, huh? Just telling him to start most conversations. I went, you know what? One of the ballsy, badass things I've seen in a long time. And I said, and I think you've won the election.
Let's park Trump for a moment because we're talking about books primarily, but it's a bit about everything. Not a lot of people will know an awful lot about you. You've got Irish connections. This isn't an Irish podcast. It's also not a books podcast. It's a story podcast. And your background is Hibernian by Hugh. Bring us there to young you and tell us a bit about your childhood.
Well, my father died when I was 1. And he was a dentist, and he had an ulcer condition.
And who was he?
His name was Eamon Vincent O'Mara from Galway. So I'm very Irish by blood.
What part of Galway was he from? Can you remember?
I just think he was in the middle. They had a guest house, his family.
The city?
In the city, yeah. And I've never been, actually, to Galway, which I must do one day.
Piers.
Yeah, I know. I'm told the Galway races are like off-the-charts fun.
It's a beautiful city. So your father, Mr. O'Mara, was very young when he died of...
Yeah. He had a ulcer condition that would now be easily fixed, but at the time proved to be fatal. It was in the mid-60s.
And your mother at this time was?
Yeah, my mum was pregnant with my brother, who then became an army colonel, and it was a very traumatic time.
And tell me about your mother.
Well, she's the rock of the family, the matriarch, the rock. Overcame obviously what was a very difficult time. Met my dad a few years later, who's your dad obviously I've known has been an amazing father to the 4 of us. Then they had 2 more kids.
Yeah.
And
but how did she meet your birth father?
Both their parents ran pubs.
So is your mum Irish as well?
No, she's not. But they both ran pubs in England, and both their parents, on both sides. And I think they met in one of the pubs, and they then ran a pub themselves. So I grew up in a country pub in East Sussex, which was, it was great. I mean, pub life is fantastic. You and I know, because when you used to do the Late Late Show in Dublin, we'd always go out afterwards to
Mary Max
for
a nice pint of stout.
Have a few pints of Guinness. So I love pubs. So there's a lot of pub blood in the family.
I got you. So just to clarify, your father in Galway met your mother in Galway?
No, in England.
In England.
He was a dentist over here, yeah.
Oh, he was a dentist here.
In Surrey, yeah.
I see. Okay, and he passed away then.
Yeah.
And your mum was left with you and your brother.
Pregnant with my brother, yeah. So a very difficult time. We got my grandmother, my mum's mum, was fantastic and took us in for a while and became, at the time, the matriarch, and then my mum sort of inherited that role, if you like. But yeah, I mean, just incredibly strong women in my family.
Okay. Incredibly
strong, and I owe them everything.
I'm dwelling on the Irish thing very briefly before I move on, because I think, did your dad go to school in Dublin?
Yeah. He went to...
was it Blackrock College?
He went to Blackrock, and then he went to University College Dublin, yeah.
Or to study dentistry and whatnot.
Yeah.
So you do have quite strong Irish lineage.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, he had a sister who had about, loads of kids, and they all moved to Banagher in Offaly.
Yeah.
So I believe I've been known as a biffo now by the common terminology, which should be totally alien to your UK audience, but extremely popular probably for your Irish audience to think of me as a biffo.
I've got loads of places to go for that. Biffo, let's just say it for what it is. It means big, ignorant fucker from Offaly.
Yes.
And that's what you're saying here. And we're not allowed to say it, but we're okay because...
I'm not denying the allegation.
So your mum then goes on to thrive and cut through. Obviously a very independent, strong-minded person.
Yeah.
Didn't let this horrible grief bring her down. She's impressive.
Very impressive. She was very young as well. And... Yeah, and then
She met your dad.
met my dad. They fell in love, and then we ended up. When I was, what was I? Maybe 4 or 5, I think. We went to a pub in East Sussex called the Griffin Inn, lovely country pub. They ran that for a decade, and it was. I mean, growing up in a pub as a kid was just fantastic. It could be a bit awkward. I mean, I remember my school sending a note back to my mum and dad once saying that I'd arrived at school smelling of beer. And they were a bit concerned about what was happening. And what was happening was I was earning pocket money by doing the bottling up.
Yeah, of course.
So in the morning, all the empties would be there. You get rid of the empties and restock. And I used to go in the cellar and get the stuff up to earn a bit of pocket money. And of course, that would make me smell of beer. So I'd arrive at school with a rather beer swilling odour, which didn't go down very well.
And the gentleman your mum married, he's obviously a Mr. Morgan.
He's Anthony Glyn Pugh Morgan,
From
fine Welshman.
Wales, obviously.
And fantastic guy, been a brilliant father to all of us. And he's going strong, 83. My mum just turned 80, had a big party for us. So yeah, feel very lucky that my parents are still alive.
When did books come into your life then, when you were young?
Oh, early age. I mean, we all were voracious book readers. I mean, I'm old enough where there was no internet. Yeah. There was no mobile phone. There were national newspapers, which were big. We used to get the Daily Mail at home and the Sunday Times at the weekend. But, only 3 television stations when I was a kid, ITV 1 and 2 and BBC 1. I think that's what it was. And that was it.
BBC 1 and 2 and ITV, yeah.
Right. That's what it was, yeah. And there was no Netflix, no Amazon, no nothing, So reading was a big deal. So we used to read a lot. All my family were big readers.
And as a kid, were you read to, or were you precocious enough?
Mum used to read to us, but they were very busy in the pub. So they used to do a kitchen as well, which my mum would run the food, amazing food. So they were busy. So yeah, we did have stuff read to us, but also we were just encouraged to read. Yeah. I mean, I went to a very good prep school called Cumnor House in East Sussex, which was a great school for reading. They really believed from top down that reading was the font of all wisdom, which it is.
What a great school.
It was a great school, and we had great teachers, and they just taught us the power of words and reading and literature. And I loved it. I reveled in it. We used to do Shakespeare plays every summer in an old Shakespeare theatre, which was an outdoor theatre, slightly crumbled. It was like something out of the Roman times. It was great. And I quickly worked out I wasn't a great actor. One of my sons is a very good actor, but I wasn't a very good actor. But I soon worked out if you were the prompter, you had to attend every rehearsal, which meant you were out of school for most of the summer. I was the best prompter you've ever come across.
And what were you drawn to books-wise as a kid?
Well, actually, a lot of Shakespeare, because Shakespeare we did these big plays right through from age 7 to 12, 13. So that was a lot of that. I had some great, crazy cousins who were into things like Joseph Conrad and would send me Nostromo, which was, it's unintelligible now. And I'm nearly 60, never mind when I was about 8 or 9. But it was my cousin Jonathan, and my other cousin Nick, who was Jonathan's brother. We're all very brilliant members of that side of the family. And Nick used to send me books like chess books, like the famous Bobby Fischer, Boris Spassky battle in 72, I think it was. And I found that riveting about the Russia v. America, the renegade American v. the Russians, the whole Cold War background. And chess was a massive deal then. And this was a huge global event, this chess tournament, and the battle between them. But also it taught me that life is basically a game of chess. Yes. So I took up chess. I was the chess champion of Cumnor House, 2 years running. The headmaster was a very big chess player. And chess has been quite an interesting part of my life. When I did Celebrity Apprentice with Trump, I was in there with Lennox Lewis, the boxer. Yes. And it turned out he liked chess. And I said, let's get a board, assuming I would just annihilate him. And he beat me 39 times out of 40. And had an amazingly irritating habit of every time he was about to checkmate me, he would stand up and walk around the table, rubbing his hands and laughing. Very annoying. But yeah, he was taught by his mum, who famously used to watch him ringside at fights. And Lennox was a great guy, but highly intelligent. If you wonder why Lennox Lewis, he had a record, I think, of 44 fights as a heavyweight professional. He lost twice, and he went back and knocked those guys both out in the rematch. So he has an almost perfect record.
I was going to say he nearly applied the precision of chess.
No, he said chess was like
boxing.
Yeah, he said you had to always be 2 or 3 punches ahead, always thinking of a game plan, always planning like a chessboard.
we've gone from books to chess, but I think that they're not disconnected.
No.
Because it's about that I really get a sense of you. I don't know you very well, but I know you a little bit, and you've always been very friendly to me whenever I meet you and welcoming to me in London. And I get the sense that young you discovering chess and the famous international match, you start learning about chess, adversary, war, plotting. Now you're into what appears to me to be your interest in life, whether it's history, politics, media. It's all about the game.
Yeah.
You're fascinated by the game.
Yeah, it is a game. And the real game is to stay in the game. I say this to my friends. It's like, as you get a bit older, I think about all the different things I've done. And actually, the only common theme is when I've been knocked down, which has happened quite a lot, is you just got to do what my favorite movie speech, which is Rocky Balboa to his son in the 6th movie, when he came back and made another one, Stallone, after 20 years. And he's got this spoiled brat son in his 20s who hates being Rocky's son and resents everything about it. And is a moaning, spoiled, entitled little ninny. And Rocky eventually has it out with him in the street. It's raining, it's dark, and he suddenly gives him the life's not a bed of roses speech. And he said, life, if you want to win in life, it's not about how hard you can hit. It's about how hard you can get hit and get back up and keep moving forward. Yeah. And that really resonated with me because that's basically how I've gone through my life and career, is that you're going to get blows. You're going to get awful things that happen to you.
Where did that come from in terms of home?
Well, I think obviously what happened to my family very early on, but my family went through a lot of things like a lot of families do. And you just learn you've got to get back up and keep moving forward. Otherwise, what else do? You give up. Some people do, but that's not been the way that our family deal with stuff. So I think from an early age, we learned you got to be resilient, you got to be determined, you got to be Rocky-like in your thinking, you got to ride the punches and keep going forward. And also just, in the end, don't take anything too seriously. I always say that outside of death or terminal illness, don't take anything overly seriously. Don't take yourself too seriously.
Yeah.
Because if you do, that way madness lies. I'm the first to laugh at myself because I think a lot of what I do is ridiculous. And I'm the first to laugh at other people because a lot of what they do is ridiculous. So I think that the enemy of life really is pomposity. I can forgive people anything apart from being pompous. Because pomposity is such an insufferable quality.
I am coming back to all of this, but I want to get to the childhood book, the book that you've chosen from your young days as a lad. Where are we going?
It's The Art of Cricket by Sir Donald Bradman, which I knew would completely bemuse you.
Well,
because I know that even though you live within walking distance of Lord's, the mecca of cricket,
yes, I do.
You know absolutely nothing about it.
I tell you what.
Have you even been to a cricket match?
I've never, I don't know what, all I know is they were the backing singers for Buddy Holly.
They're annoying insects.
They're annoying insects. And it's a game maybe for toffs. I don't know. But
it's not that. Look, cricket to me was something, when I went to live in a village, cricket life was just everything to me. And I love the fact that at its heart, it's a team game, but my God, it's a solitary team game, because if you're a batsman, it doesn't matter what the rest of your team's doing, it's you and that bowler. It's one-on-one. And, as a bowler, it's slightly different because you're relying on your fielders to catch the ball, maybe. Yes. But as a batsman, it's a lonely existence.
So the book?
The book is The Art of Cricket. Don Bradman was not just the greatest cricketer of all time. He had a final test match average of 99.94. Had he scored 4 runs in his last ever innings, which everyone knew was his last innings, he would have averaged 100, which would have made him essentially a perfect cricketer, because 100 is the holy grail of cricket to get a century. The book is a coaching manual, but really it's a life manual. It's not really about cricket, and that's why I wanted to choose it and talk to you about it, because Bradman had a lot of qualities which I think could really improve people's lives.
Okay.
He believed in finding what you're good at and then becoming the best you could possibly be at that thing. So chase your passion, chase your dream. His was cricket. He used to practice by throwing a golf ball at a corrugated fence until it came back true. Think about that and how difficult that is, right? So this was a guy with an unbelievable eye, an incredible talent. He was very dedicated, an amazing trainer. I don't think you achieve anything in life without being dedicated in the practice. The famous
1,000 hours.
Malcolm Gladwell, 10,000 hours.
10,000.
Whether it's the Beatles in Hamburg,
Yeah.
Playing gig after gig after gig, whether it's Tiger Woods with his dad putting 1,000 times a day, whatever it is, you don't really see anyone get to the very top of whatever it is.
What was your version of that?
Local newspapers. I mean, I did a proper 2.5-year internship on the Surrey and South London newspaper group, and it was hard graft.
What did you learn from that?
You learn the basics of law, journalism law, shorthand, as we had then, because there were no tape recorders. So you learn 100 words a minute, T-line shorthand. I could do that.
Yeah.
Probably still knock it out now, actually. But also you learned the discipline of deadlines, of copy filing, of the need to be accurate, of the need to, in my case, the love of the scoop. I loved breaking scoops early on.
And the cricket book gave you a sort of a sense of obviously your favourite sport, but also passion, follow your dreams. I mean,
dedication,
it was a manual for life.
Dedication. As well. Also, he was an absolute killer winner. He believed winning is what matters in life. I totally agree. People who go through life thinking that losing's fine or even to be celebrated. I always get worked up about the Olympics when I keep hearing people won a bronze medal. What does that mean? How do you win coming third? You don't. You lost, right? You don't win if you come third or second. So this silver bronze thing, I don't get that.
Do you not?
No, and nor do any of the champions. If you talk to any of the great gold medal winning champions, ask Usain Bolt what he thinks about coming second or third. They're the worst days of his life. Well, something to be celebrated.
Where does the drive to win come in you? I mean, I'm fascinated by that. There's just the desire to be the best. It's kind of Trumpy, as we'd say now.
Having two brothers. Well, I don't know. Trump, I mean, look, the thing about Trump on the winning thing, I've never seen that as a justifiable stick to beat him with. Why wouldn't you want to win in life?
But go back to your brothers.
Well, they were very competitive with me. They were very good at sport. We used to physically fight all the time, but also play a lot of sport together. And I think we were all very, very competitive. If you've got brothers, I think then, particularly if there's like three of you, then you grew up in a very competitive environment.
I have two. Go on.
You're competing with each other. You're competing for your parents' approval. And I think that was really instilled in us. And I think I went to a prep school, then a comprehensive. That toughens you up a bit when you have a very privileged education at one school, and then you go to a regular comprehensive school, state school. And I thought it did me the world of good, actually.
I've got a sense of you. You're unlike any guest we've had on this show because you've kind of brought us through into your teens, and we haven't got quite to your early 20s. But I'd love to get a sense of the book that changed your life and why it did so. Where are you bringing us for that?
An Evil Cradling by Brian Keenan, someone I know that you've interviewed before.
Yes.
I never have, sadly. I'd love to.
Tell us who he was. For
so people. there were three very famous,
or is I should say,
hostages who were captured and held hostage in Beirut, in the Lebanon. John McCarthy, Terry Waite, and Brian Keenan. And Brian Keenan was Terry Waite was a man of the clergy, a giant of a man, 6'6", 6'7", bearded, very English. Then you had John McCarthy, another English guy, journalist, and then you had Brian Keenan, who was an author, who was very Irish. And so they were an interesting trio. And McCarthy and Keenan spent, I think, up to 4 years basically chained to radiators in underground dungeons in Beirut, being moved around constantly, being regularly beaten, physically tortured, and only had each other for company. And they all wrote books, and they're all very powerful books. But I got to say, Keenan's book was incredible. If anyone hasn't read it yet, you should just go and read it. It will give you the perspective on life you need, because he had a lovely life, and then suddenly he had no life, and his life was being beaten, kept in a dungeon, never seeing daylight. If they were moved around, they were in boots of cars, in bags. And there's one little nugget in the book, which I just never forgot. And it was where he had a radio. And it was just outside his cell. And they let him listen to the BBC World Service, I think. And then one day, one of the guards, just for kicks, put it to static and put it on full volume. And they left it there for 3 weeks. Now think about that.
Yeah.
You've already been in captivity for several years. This is the only thing you have that takes your mind away from it. The only place you get any news about what's happening anywhere in the world. And it's turned to static full volume for 3 weeks. Imagine what that would do to your brain, to your soul, to your well-being, to your resistance, if you like. And the way he talks about it and the way he just was so utterly determined it wouldn't break him is just dazzlingly courageous and inspiring. And defiant. I mean, the thing about Keenan was you could just imagine him, his eyes blazing with defiance. It come throughout the writing. He was a very good writer anyway. So you put a very good writer into that real life scenario and you get this tour de force book of utter defiance. Now, I don't dispute for a moment that all of them were probably very damaged by that experience. They all concede that. But wow, to come through that and to never give in is quite extraordinary. And I think also for normal people, when you read it, you then think about your life. And it's a cliche to say, well, you get a perspective in life, but you do.
Yeah.
I mean, how could you not? Every time I go through a difficult period in my life, I do actually think back to Brian Keenan and the static radio and think, well, at least it's not that, right? Everything there's always somebody worse off. Not many went through what he went through.
I recall his description facing him in the studio as, first of all, a very gentle man.
Yeah.
But he described what black looked like and how bottomless, what an abyss that was, and how you know this from the book. And as you say, he was a poet of sorts, actually, and how lyrical he is. I think he's a Belfast man originally, and now living in Dunleary in Dublin. I often used to see him when I was there walking along. And as you're speaking about the static and I'm thinking about the blackness, what must the sea breeze feel like in his hair?
Unbelievable. And, you talk about freedom. Imagine what freedom feels like when you've gone through 4-5 years of your life in that. And I think that's why freedom's important. When people have this battle these days, culture war battles over things like freedom of speech. Yeah. You got to remember, people have died so that you have free speech. That's why it matters.
Why do you think the book was so life-changing or moving in that respect?
Just gave me just incredible perspective. I was in my late teens, maybe early 20s when it came out. Yeah. I've read it maybe 3 or 4 times. I'm going to go read it again now. Yeah, you made me think I must go and read that book again because it is just one of those books. You just go through it and you live the hell with him. But it is, whilst also desperate and awful and shocking and appalling, it's also inspiring and moving and uplifting in a weird way. And ultimately, it ends happily, albeit in a damaged way. But it has a happy ending at the end. It's an amazing book. I mean, I take my hat off to those guys. You never know how you would deal with it yourself, but extraordinary personal courage.
What was your darkest hour in life to date?
Well, I mean, look, I think I've gone through the deaths of friends. I lost one of my best village friends a couple of weeks ago. I've known him 45 years.
Sorry to hear that.
We did everything together. We, cricket, played 20 years together.
Tell us his name.
Miles Edward Caldwell, a great guy. One of the first friends I made when I went to the comprehensive. So he used to hang out with me, and I've really appreciated that. And we then loved cricket, and we used to play for Newark cricket team for 20 years. And then we bought our first house together up in London, in Morden Road, Mitcham. Yeah. And we got burgled so many times that by the end, me and the 2 other mates who were with us left the doors open when we went to work and left a sign saying, "Dear burglars, please come in. Everything's been stolen." And we never got burgled again because they thought it was a trap. I do actually think it's quite good advice. If you get burgled a lot, just make it, just leave everything open.
No challenge.
Because they're like, whoa, hang on, what's this about?
And how did Miles die?
He came to Lords with me last year, and we used to go every year. I think we worked out we'd been 100 times together. Right. And it was the same group, another couple of mates, Malcolm and Sloan, who bought this house with me. We'd always sit together. We'd always get drunk. We'd always have a great time. Miles was 57, and he turned up late. And it was very unlike him. It was an Ashes test match, which he loved, and he turned up late. And there was something a bit off with him. And anyway, long story short, that night he got a scan, and they found a tumour the size of an apple above his eye, and he had incurable stage 4 glioblastoma brain cancer, which is the cancer that killed Joe Biden's son, John McCain, the senator who ran for president, Teddy Kennedy. It's a brutal, awful, awful cancer to get, incredibly aggressive. And most people who get it die within a year to 18 months, and he managed to survive 15 months, and it was just desperately sad.
And how are you with grief?
I mean, in his case, I saw a lot of him, and I've had friends who've died, but they've died suddenly, car crashes and things like that, which is shocking and horrific. But to actually have a really close friend where for an extended period of time, you know what's going to happen and they know what's going to happen, and it's just a question of time. I mean, it's a double-edged thing where on one level, it's horrendous and incredibly painful. On the other, you tend to have conversations you might never have had.
Yeah.
And I do think that. I certainly had conversations with Miles that I probably would never have had with him, quite profound conversations. And so there's that upside. But the reality of cancer, as anyone who's known people who go through it, particularly a brutal one like glioblastoma, it's just horrific. And the amount of funding into it is incredibly low. The fact that we have incurable cancers these days seems to me extremely baffling, given the power of AI and all these things to change the world. And you can only hope and pray they work out quickly how to take AI and cure cancer, because it must be achievable. It was a very sad experience.
Are you a sensitive person? I'm not trying to tap into society that doesn't exist. I'm simply saying, I know you have to have a thick skin in this business, and particularly you more than most, because you give it out and you get it back. Are you a sensitive soul or no? So what are you? How do you describe yourself?
I mean,
emotionally, are you
no, I'm not emotionally closed off. I think I can be, I can be emotional with people, but I'm not a crier really. I mean, it takes an awful lot to generate a tear from my duct. I'm just not. I think when you've been editor of a newspaper, a daily paper in particular, for 10 years, you're seeing so much stuff. You're covering 9/11, you're covering Dunblane in particular. I remember it was horrific. That kind of thing would bring a tear out. But it also, sadly would put things into perspective. It takes a lot to make me feel that way.
Yeah. Like what?
I mean, probably the last time I cried was my grandmother's funeral. I remember having to speak there, and that was very difficult.
When was that?
2013. Yeah. But it was, it was just because I owed her so much, and she was such a remarkable person, had an amazing life, lived to my mid-90s. But I just remembered what she'd done for me when I was very young, and what she continued doing for me, and what she still does. She used to have this great phrase, which is my Twitter bio: "One day you're the cock of the walk, the next you're the feather duster." And or a feather duster, and she drew a cock of the walk and a feather duster for me once. And whenever she felt I was getting a bit too big for my boots, she'd send me a copy of that, which was great because it would calm me down when she thought I was doing a little bit too much chest beating. That was really good. And she had another one, which her brother, who'd been a war hero, won the George Medal for bravery, and he'd gone to see a flower seller in Covent Garden. Who said, remember, life ain't much, but it's all you got. So stick a geranium in your hat and be happy. Which, again, is a pretty good saying, right? It's you can put a geranium in your hat and be happy. And I do think when you lose friends and you lose family and so on, actually what you realise, especially as you get a bit older, my parents both lived both in their 80s, but they talked about this. You lose a lot of great friends.
Sure.
And you can't replace great friends. When I think about my friend Miles, you don't go and find another friend you've known 45 years who's been there through thick and thin, who's laughed with you, cried with you, fought with you, whatever it is. You go through so much together that it's incredibly difficult. It's impossible to replace that. And you just think, well, you've got to live, it's another cliche, you've got to live every day like it's your last. I remember a guy who told me that was a guy called Matthew Harding, who had a stand at Chelsea named after him. And he was an insurance broker, multimillionaire, massive Chelsea fan. And he used to always say this to me, life, because I did a year of insurance. That's where I met him, in the Lloyd's building when I was about 18. And he used to always say, live every day like it's your last, Piersy, because one day you'll be right. Think about it.
It's nice.
Think about it.
It's nice.
And he died, in his early 40s in
Wow.
a helicopter crash leaving a Chelsea game up in Bolton, I think it was.
Crikey.
Yeah. But he certainly would not have died wandering. He led a life where he lived every day like it was his last.
Yeah, I love that expression. My mother uses that a lot. You say he didn't die wandering. The book that made you cry, I mean, you've established that it takes a lot to make you cry. So I suppose in some ways, maybe a book hasn't done that, but you've got a book that's made you emotional or certainly moved you.
It certainly moved me very much, the Keenan book. I don't think I actually shed a tear. I don't think I've ever shed a tear reading a book, actually. But I don't shed a tear generally. So it doesn't. I tend to hold it back a bit like that.
So you're choosing the Keenan book as the book that made you cry. But
well, I would say that moved me the most.
Yes, okay. And the book that changed your life?
The book that changed my life, I've chosen, it was a biography of Rupert Murdoch called Murdoch by William Shawcross, now Lord Shawcross. Mr. Murdoch, of course, is our boss.
Indeed. I love the collective there. Lovely. Let's talk. Who is Rupert Murdoch? I mean, without obviously a journalism lecture, in the Piers Morgan school of thought, who is this guy?
I mean, I saw him in New York last week, actually, and we had a great catch-up chat. And he's been, for me, one of the most pivotal people in my life.
Yeah.
Without any question. He took me when I was 28 and made me editor of his biggest-selling newspaper in the world.
Did he ever tell you what he saw in you? Did he ever say it straight out?
No, I just think Rupert, he liked to roll the dice on his gut feeling.
Okay.
Generally. In life, I think.
So he had quite a nice upbringing himself as a young man.
He did, but his father died when he was 21.
Yeah.
And Rupert had been being groomed by his dad to potentially take over the business, but never thought it would be when he was that young. He was 21. And he took on a couple of papers in Adelaide, and one was called The News, I think. And he turned these two papers and a few other bits and pieces in this media business his dad had. He turned it into one of the great powerhouse media empires the world has ever seen.
Yes. And
I got just incredible admiration for the way he went about it. He just, to this day, he loves news and journalists and
newspapers,
television news. He's just a news junkie like I am.
Yeah.
And loves it. And, when I saw him, he'd just been speaking to Trump and he was full of the US election and everything else. And it was just invigorating, as always, to be in his orbit. He gets flack from people who don't know him, have never met him. You have a completely warped idea of what he's like. In my regular dealings with him over the years, I just think he's one of the most brilliant, forward-thinking minds I've ever come across. He always would see 5-10 years ahead.
Who gives him flack?
I think there are people who don't like tabloid newspapers, which I understand. I love them personally. I think they're a sort of visceral form of bringing news and entertainment and sport to the world. At their best, they can change the world. Like everything, they can be imperfect. I don't pretend that we were a bunch of choir boys and choir girls running around. But I do think that certainly when I was a journalist and then an editor, you wanted to make an impact and you wanted to make a good impact. And I think that Rupert doesn't get enough credit perhaps for some of the good that he's done, which is a lot. I mean, he's brought news to places in the world. I don't know how many hundreds of papers he's owned. He's fought incredible campaigns on the papers. He's made huge inroads into things like cable news in America, but also done it in Australia, New Zealand, in the UK. The way he revolutionized sport in the UK with Sky Sport was so ahead of its time. We wouldn't have a Premier League without Rupert Murdoch. And he went and did the same with Fox Sport in America. So I just think there's a lot of things where he gets a hard time, but for me, he's been one of the great media figures.
So I asked you about the book that changed your life. You're telling me about the man that clears.
Because the book was a story of his life.
I appreciate that.
Yeah, but I read it on the plane over to see him in Miami.
Yes.
When I was the editor of the Bazaar column on the Sun, literally doing
your homework,
pop and showbiz stuff. And I got a call. I'd met him at a dinner a month before, and I got a call from the then editor of the Sun, Kelvin McKenzie.
Yes.
Said the boss wants to see you. I went, okay. He said, in Miami tomorrow. So you're on the plane tonight. I went, what? And I literally flew to Miami, woke up in the morning, was told to call him, called him, and then he said, let's go for a walk. We walked along Miami Beach for 3 hours in the surf, shoes and socks off, and talked about the world. And he never actually said to me what I was doing there. And I just thought, what am I doing here? And I thought, but I'd read the book on the way over. I'd read all the Time magazine, The Economist, Newsweek. I was up to speed with everything I thought he might talk about. And actually, he just wanted to talk about me and life. And it was very interesting and clearly just trying to work me out. And we went to, he just bought the rights to the NFL, the Football League in America, for Fox. It was a huge deal. And we had a launch party for that night. He was hosting. And we went along, and there was a guy called Dave Hill, a great Australian character, who went on to revolutionize Sky Sport, Fox Sport. Brilliant bloke. And he was standing there, and Rupert introduced me to Dave as his my friend Piers from London. He's a new editor of the News of the World. That's how I found out.
That's how you found out?
Yeah, by him telling Dave Hill.
That walk on the beach was essentially an elongated job interview / audition.
I guess so, yeah.
Are you a centre-right, right-wing, centre? Centre.
I think, I would have said when I was running the Mirror, I was probably slightly left of centre.
Then you get a bit older.
News of the World was more centre-right, I would say, when I was there. The Mirror was centre-left. I think that as the woke brigade have got ever more bonkers, I have no connection to them at all.
Yeah.
So as the left's dragged itself into this weird far-left bonkers place, I felt more and more of a genuine centrist. And I think that's probably the best place for journalists to be. Because I don't come at things ideologically anymore from a left or right. I'm not interested. I'm interested in taking on everybody and having everybody on and just having uncensored chat with them.
And what about detractors and critics and people who say...
My morning fuel, Ryan.
Tell me about your
burning through my soul.
Tell me about your morning fuel. What does it look like or sound like?
There's nothing I like more than waking up and seeing somebody writing me off or abusing me or,
Do you
whatever.
read it all?
I would on Twitter or X as it is now. You can't miss it, So you wake up, you have a good dose of venom pouring on your head. I find it quite empowering,
Well, what do you do? Because
I normally correct their spelling, and that normally drives them mad. Because what happens is you watch it in real time. My favourite thing is you get some troll who says, "I hope you get beheaded by ISIS this morning," but he's spelt beheaded wrong, and so I correct beheaded, and then you see tweet deleted, and then you see account deleted. It's like they literally get vaporized because they're so shamed by the social media community. So look, I think that I have a very thick skin. Yeah. I mean, it's not. People will tell you who know me. I do have a very thick skin.
And do you believe in...
Very little permeates my
I appreciate that. Do you believe in balance then in your programs and your journalism? You just like to,
Yeah.
So you say anti-woke brigade, and the woke people will say, well, that doesn't feel very balanced to me.
I'm not balanced when it comes to the woke world.
That thing drives you mad. But
because I think it's all based on nonsense. I mean, for me, the tipping point as somebody who identifies as a liberal, with what liberal values mean. For me, the tipping point of this modern day fascism, which is what the woke brigade has become, where they want to dictate exactly how everyone has to think or what they can laugh at, what they can read, what they can dress like, which historical figures are allowed to admire, and so on and so on and so on. It's a form of fascism. And when these people say, oh, we're for women's rights, and at the same time they want to encourage the trans athlete participation in women's sport, which is obviously such a grotesque abuse of women's rights to fairness and equality. I'm like, you people are mad. You're nuts. You're not interested in facts. You're just interested in a fantasy world of virtue signaling bullshit, and I'm not having it, and I have nothing to do with you. So I don't think it's not impartial to me or biased to think they're bonkers. They are bonkers. That's why Trump just won so big in America, because America's just went, we're just done with this joyless fascism.
So imagine somebody's listening to this, right, as a regular listener to the podcast and says, Piers Morgan wouldn't be my choice of a great guest for that. And I'll say, no, I disagree. I think we had Alistair Campbell last week. It's all fair in Love and War. And then they're saying, actually, I really enjoyed this interview. And then they go, he's just called me a bonkers left-wing fascist. So what do you say to them?
No, because
do you bother to endeavor to appease them, or do you say, no, I'm sorry, we're never going to be friends?
No, I wrote a book called Wake Up. It was a #1 bestseller after I left Good Morning Britain. Or it was around the same time. And it was a clarion call to my liberal friends. Wake the fuck up. Because if you don't, you're going to never win an election again.
Yeah.
You're all mad. You're looking at the sky when it's blue and you're saying it's green. And if people don't agree that it's green, you want them shamed, vilified, jailed, and preferably killed. Right? You are the very fascist you pretend to hate. This is fascism. And it's nuts.
Let's go towards the end of our conversation where we kind of began, which was you just off the plane as you have been, and you were talking to President-elect Donald Trump on the phone, and you have a friendship, as you say, of sorts. You've fallen out with him, I remember, in the past.
That's a big fallings out, but then we fall back in.
Yeah.
He's been very good to me, Trump, over the years. When I left CNN and came back to England, I could count on one hand the number of high-profile Americans who bothered to contact me. Trump would call me every 3-4 weeks and send me regular notes.
Why do you think that was?
I just think if you've been good to Trump and you've been loyal to Trump and you've been fair to Trump, he's all those things back to you. If you go full on attack Trump constantly, he reverts back to his book, The Art of the Deal. Somebody punches you, punch them 10 times back, right? That's his default mechanism to being punched. And that's why I urge people this time to try to park the hysteria. Try to focus on what he does, not what he says, is always a good starting point with Trump. Because if you did that with the first term, with the exception of the way he left office, which was disgraceful, actually, he was a reasonably moderate Republican president by historical standards. It was just what came out of his mouth that enraged people so much. And he's a trash-talking New York real estate
tycoon. And let me ask to bring it back to you. When you're on your show, when you're uncensored, when you're an old dancer with you, is there a panto Piers and is there a home Piers?
No, I think increasingly I've tried to be genuinely authentic.
Really?
Because I think I've always felt it's a bit theatrical, the whole world of television in particular. And I've really tried to stop that in myself because I do think that actually there's a power of authenticity. And there's also a power, which I've developed now, where I'm prepared to change my mind. If somebody gives me a really coherent, good argument, which makes me rethink my thing, I don't mind saying, excuse me, you know what? Yeah.
I think you did that with Israel. Did you say Israel gone too far in Gaza?
I actually did it recently. Well, with Israel, it was more complicated because I kept asking, I don't know what a proportionate response is to October the 7th.
But that in itself is a judgment by you.
Yeah. An interesting one would be, for example, Mehdi Hassan came on. He's very pro-Palestinian, very anti-Israel. But I'd said previously that I felt what Russia were doing in Ukraine was a genocide. And he said, why would you say that? But what Israel's doing in Gaza is not a genocide. Well, I said, well, actually, I have rethought it. Not about Israel, because I don't think what they're doing is genocide. It's a response to a terror attack. And I think the response has gone too far. But I don't think it's genocide. But I said, what has happened in Ukraine, I don't think I would categorize that as genocide. Now I've thought about it, because actually it was just an illegal invasion of a country to take territory. That again is not what genocide means. So I think you've got to be careful with terminology. And but I'm not afraid to say, you know what? I used to be absolutely adamant I was never wrong. When you're an editor of a newspaper, you kind of, I've said this before, it's kind of like playing God, and God can't afford to be wrong too many times, right? So you are self-righteous, you're absolutely clear in your head because you've got a whole team of people who need you to be that person. You're making judgment calls all day long, and they're going to be in a newspaper that night, printed and sent to people, and then you start again the next day. There's no time to faff around with long, thinking time. So that's the world I came from. Now I've got more time. My interviews are longer. The debates are longer. I've got more time to think about stuff. I've got more time to read alternative views. If I have a big guest on who's got different views to me, I'm really, rather than saying, well, I'll argue with him for an hour, I'm more like, well, actually, where can we find common ground? Yeah. It's more interesting.
Let's talk about the final question, which is the name of the autobiography you have yet to write. You've written very entertaining diaries and books, of course, in the past, but where are we in your life? You said you're approaching 60, so that might play in your head as well. You've mentioned your grandmother who meant the world to you, and she had some pretty interesting things to say by way of keeping your feet on the ground. Where are you going for your autobiography?
I would actually take my grandmother's line of, one day you're cock of the walk. One day you're the cock of the walk, the next you're a feather duster. There is no better line to keep in mind, whatever you do in life. Enjoy the good times, but never be under any illusion that there could be a bad time around the corner, because there almost certainly will be.
Yeah.
Whatever that may be, professional, personal, you are going to get hit with stuff that's going to challenge you. And how you respond to the bad stuff will dictate how you can enjoy your life. It's honestly as simple as that. And I always say to people, look, also I say this, that when you go through bad stuff, it feels like the worst thing in the world. I've been there. multiple times. And you think, I'll never get out of this.
Mm.
When I look back, I did get out of it. I'm here. Very happy. Having to deal with bad stuff. My friend dying recently, awful. But generally in my life, I'm pretty happy. I'm still doing what I love doing. I wake up in the morning, I'm pretty healthy, thank God. I enjoy my life, enjoy my friends, enjoy my family. A lot to be very grateful for. I think too often people get too bogged down in negative stuff, and they forget to see the positive wood for the trees. Most of us, statistically, this is the best time to ever be alive. People are living longer. They're living healthier. There were fewer wars than in recorded history. There's cleaner water. There's less child poverty. There's better medicine. If you take almost any metric that you care to take, this is the best time to be alive. This is the golden age in the history of the planet. So enjoy it.
Piers Morgan, always great to see you. And I really enjoyed our chat today. Thanks for your time.
My pleasure.
So here's this week's Ryan Recommends, brought to you by Eason, Ireland's favourite bookseller. I'm going to go with Al Pacino's autobiography. It's called Sonny Boy. And this guy is larger than life. He's been in The Godfather. He was in Carlito's Way. He was in Scent of a Woman, The Devil's Advocate. His canon of films are just so amazing that his life matches it, from his early childhood, difficult parents, difficult upbringing to an extent, marriages not always beautiful, but he tells them in a dramatic way, and a way that you just want to know more about who is this guy that we've been watching for years and years on the big screen. Took him a long time to get there, but he got there in the end. Sonny Boy by Al Pacino. This book and all the books we discuss on this episode of the podcast are available now in your local Eason store, or you can order them online from easons.com before 6 p.m. for same-day dispatch with free delivery when you spend over at tenner. Eason, be inspired.